I think I figured out. Did you see that? I figured out how to do that recording and upload it. That was a lot more painful than I thought it was going to be.
Thank you, though.
Yeah. I grabbed. There's a website that like I always like Derek wanted Neo bars, and so I sent messages to the Neo bar company, and they sent me a whole bunch of stuff. And then he's like, "Hey, I need the Hollisters." So I sent messages to the Hollister company, and they sent me a whole bunch of these things for free. Pretty cool, huh? So like now we can practice putting these on our mannequins, and they sent me some bite blocks and some other cool stuff. Like they're like, just make sure you mention us in your on your page. So I won't take the stickers off. Now you can intubate me. I'm gonna wear it around for the day and see if it's uncomfortable or not. We'll go shopping. But they have two different ones. They have a normal and then they have a slim. And I ended up saying. But then your tube, I don't know if you can see that. Your tube will be right here, and that wraps around the tube. There's a little sticky, and you pull that off, and it'll stick onto the tube. And there's some grip on the bottom, and you'll wrap that around. So this part's sticking onto the tube, and then it comes up here, and you lock it in place. And it'll hold the tube right there. Stay in place. The stickers, what they say is the stickers are supposed to be enough to hold that in place securely. And this strap is for confidence. I wouldn't put it on without the strap. These things fall off all the time. You'll see them like sliding. If they start to drop down here, they're not accurate. They're not stable. And the tube will start moving back and forth. So we get them up here, and we'll replace them if they fall down here. You have bones right here that don't move. The bones don't move. It's just like when we do a Neo bar, you want to attach them onto the bony structure. If you attach them onto the cheeks, like someone who's like super fit and lean and like really muscular, maybe their cheeks won't move so much. But if you have somebody not one facial expression change, that's ridiculous. But somebody who has like loose skin, like the older you are, the less pliable your skin is. The people who have a lot of adipose tissue, there's a lot of movement. So if you're here, it can move a lot. If it's up here, it doesn't move as much. So you want it as high up on the bone as possible. And then have that secure like that. It's pretty cool, right? And then here's the beauty. Check this out. I got this here, and it's glued in place. I can move. Shad, seriously?
Yeah.
Where'd you go? No, I'm showing you this. So we can move this back and forth. So to keep from having breakdown, keep from having skin breakdown. We want to make sure that we have the least amount of skin breakdown as possible, because if we have skin breakdown on our patients, we don't pay. They don't pay. They don't get. There's hospitals don't get reimbursed if there's a bed sore that's created or any kind of skin breakdown, any skin breakdown anywhere. They don't get paid from the insurance company or Medicare or Medicaid until that sore is healed. So you can lose a lot of money in healthcare by having bed sores. So that's why we use those instead of the tape that we used to use. All right. Share screen. All right. Man, this just disappeared here. I wish I had like an auto button where it would automatically put you guys' faces up there so I could see your faces. All right. Any questions before we go?
Yeah, I'm looking under week 2 for Monday, and I don't see this.
It should be Tuesday. Yeah. Remember, we had to move the whole thing. Oh, that's the other thing, too. I talked to Paula. She's the assistant campus director. She said, oh, you guys, yeah, some of you might have missed that. I'm working on a live document schedule thing that's a Google Docs. So the schedule will like, whenever it's changed, it'll automatically upload for everywhere. So I don't have to keep going back and back. It'll stay in Google Docs and you'll just have a link for it. You click on it and then it'll be live and I can add links to it and everything. That's this new thing that they're trying. And it's super time. But I told them, I'm like, I can't get this. I need this week to be, to know when we can get into the lab. So she said she's going to call me. She said she should know by like 3:00 today whether we'll be able to get in the lab on Wednesday. So hopefully all will be good. If not, we'll just move it to Friday. Yeah, we're at the mercy of the flooring people. So, all right. Everybody ready? Did I answer your question? Okay. Yeah. So how a breath is delivered, and that's chapter 3 in Pilbeams. And if you look at this lecture, it follows the chapter. This is a big thought process thing. The equation of motion. We think of muscle pressure. Muscle pressure, that's the patient's strength, their ability to generate negative force to have air go into their lungs. Plus the ventilator pressure, that's what the ventilator is able to generate pressure-wise and strength, like power-wise, to create a volume or a pressure that will allow the patient to have good gas exchange. And then what is that fighting? Well, it's fighting the elastic recoil of the lungs. Remember, for every pressure that's going out, you have the same amount of pressure that's going to be coming back. And the only variable in that is time. Remember, compliance is the opposite of elastance, or elastance is the opposite of compliance, right? So how compliant is the lung? How hard is it to fill it up? Well, that's the opposite is the other way around. And then the resistance of the airway. So yesterday we had that patient that we were coding. Here's the problem. Sometimes intubations in hectic situations are not the most beautiful, and sometimes they cause some trauma, which causes bleeding, and then you get a lot of blood down in the airway. Well, our resistance was 30 on there, so that's really, really high. Now, in an intubated patient, does anybody know where your resistance should kind of sort of be, like in a general area? Right. So we tend to see it like
10 to 15.
What's that?
10 to 15.
Yeah, or even lower, like on a healthy patient with a good size ET tube, you'll see it. And I have all the values. I think I uploaded that on there, but you'll see about 5 to 10, 5 to 15 is normal for a resistance on an intubated patient. And when you start seeing it above that, you have to start thinking, okay, is it too small of an airway? Is the suction catheter in the ET tube narrowing the frame in? Is there secretions in the airway? Does the patient have bronchospasm? Right. Those are your major ones that are going to cause an increase in resistance. And when you have an increase in resistance, depending on the delivery of method of the breath, you'll have an increase in pressure or a decrease in volume. Right. So we really want, which is going to cause trauma down the road if we have increase in resistance. So you want to lower the resistance as much as we can to decrease the actual pressure that either the patient or the ventilator would have to do. So if you take any one of these things, I mean, it's just an equation, right? So if the patient doesn't have good muscle pressure, like they're weak, the ventilator has to take over more work, or you won't be able to overcome the elastic recoil or the resistance. As the resistance goes up, we have to have more muscle strength or more ventilator pressure to overcome it. And you can take any one of those out and recalculate it out, and it'll make sense. So this equation of motion actually is a really big deal when you think of the thought process. Now, we took together before, like, what's wrong with the patient? Is it an oxygen issue or is it a CO2 issue? So type 1 or type 2, right? So then we look at it like type 1 or type 2. Well, is it, are we having a muscle issue? Are we having a ventilator, lack of volume or pressure going in? Or do we need, is it the elastic recoil? How could we fix, like, say, like we had elastic recoil pressure? What could that be like? I'll give you a super good one. I was on a flight to Sacramento with a burn patient, and I had to do an escharotomy on a patient. They were burned so bad that their skin was so taut, they couldn't expand their thoracic cavity. So we had to take a scalpel and cut down through the tissue to open them up. And so their chest is able to expand and they're able to get more volumes into their lung. Right. So that's, like they do not want to expand. Right. So pretty crazy, right? So the motion is in the lungs, right? We need to have the lungs expanding and then going back to, not contracting, but going back to their normal recoil to allow for CO2 to go out. So the expansion is oxygenation, the contraction is blowing off CO2. To make the move, we need to either use muscle pressure or ventilator pressure or a combination of the two. And this is the beauty of technology now. Like originally with ventilators, we would use a ventilator and say either, the anesthesiologist is either God, they manage everything, like you sedate and paralyze the patient, and it was just the ventilator, or it was the patient does everything on their own. And there wasn't a good mix. But now with the advanced modes that we put a patient in ASV on a G5, and it's an automated mode where whatever the patient's not doing, the ventilator makes up for it to meet the desired minute ventilation based on their height. That's pretty impressive, right? Or height or ideal body weight. That's really impressive. The technology is amazing now. So it's a combination of the muscle pressure, the ventilator pressure in, fighting the opposites of the elastic recoil and resistance. So the things that recoil the breath, compliance and resistance. A bad compliance will really, really, really make you have some serious problems. And we look at our COVID patients. That's what we're seeing. There's a lot of fluid around the alveoli, which is allowing for the airway to collapse. If the airway collapses, there's a lot of resistance, like protein around those alveoli, so they can't expand. There's a gap between the membranes. They have a lot of weight on the alveoli. If there's a lot of weight on there, they want the alveoli to collapse. That increases the resistance. And decreases the compliance. Actually, that should just decreases the compliance. Pretty crazy, right? Good stuff. It's just another way of looking at it. Lung mechanics resistance equals change in. Remember that triangle. You'll see me use that a lot. You got to get used to that triangle. Triangle is just change, right? That's all it means. Just change. So like you'll see a lot of times when we're swapping out equipment, like when we're changing a circuit, you'll see a triangle with a dash D, like changed on 516. Right. So that's what we know it was changed on 516 is because the triangle is change. Okay. Make sure you got that in your notes so you remember it, because you'll see that over and over and over. And you'll see that is called a delta, right? So delta P is a change in pressure. Okay, delta P is change in pressure. That becomes important when we talk about high frequency ventilation. Delta is change. So factors controlled and measured during inspiration. When we have a ventilator, there's two that we're going to focus on. Okay, when we're looking at a ventilator, we typically have two major modes major mode categories that we use. This is where we get people's minds stuck in this weird loss of knowledge, right? Is you have categories of modes. You have pressure modes, volume modes, and then flow and time, which you almost never see anymore. It's good to know they exist. But pressure modes and volume modes are the two categories. You have an SIMV pressure mode. You have an assist control pressure mode, and then you have an SIMV volume mode and an SIMV, an assist control volume mode. So there's those two major categories, pressure and volume. Okay, pressure and volume. All right, so pressure control. What is pressure control? This is really important to get this concept down in the beginning so you don't get confused with the thought process down the road. Pressure control breaths delivers pressure to the airways, resulting in a volume. So the answer's on there. But when we look at what that pressure does, say I'm setting 20 centimeters of water pressure into your lungs, that's what I'm sending in. How do I know what volume I'm going to get? Anybody can go. Anybody can guess.
Would you be able to calculate the volume from the change in pressures between the inspiration and expiration?
That would just give you a volume variable. But the thing that's going to change how much volume you're going to get, if you deliver a pressure breath, the volume's variable, right? And it's variable based on the compliance and resistance. That's weird, right? Because we just learned that with the work of breathing calculation, right? That causes us to, that's what we're fighting, is pretty much resistance and compliance, right? So if we're fighting resistance and compliance, I can give 20 centimeters of water pressure and it gives somebody 500 mLs. And then I have somebody else with low compliance and high resistance, and that gives them 50 mLs. Right? So it could be significantly different. I had a patient yesterday, and his compliance, he was getting 77 mLs per centimeter of water pressure. Holy smokes, those super compliant lungs. He's not sick at all, right? Like his lungs aren't sick. He had other issues, but his lungs weren't sick. Huge, huge volumes he's getting with hardly any pressure behind it. That's great, right? His lungs are healthy. But then you have other people who you're trying to, like in the COVID unit, you're trying to give them, 6 mLs per kilo. And so say they weigh, I don't know, 50 kilos. I don't know. So it's supposed to be a 250 tidal volume, and they're getting 50 because their lungs are not compliant at all. So, so the other thing with pressure control, you have a constant, you have a flow going through the ventilator, and that flow was able to make up for a leak in the system. So we'll take patients that they have a big leak around their ET tube or their trach or whatever. We'll, instead of putting them in a volume mode, we'll put them in a pressure mode, because the ventilator will continue to deliver that flow until they reach that pressure, despite the fact it's leaking out somewhere, right? So it'll ramp the power up for the vent, right? The equation of motion power, vent power, will increase to meet the desired outcome of the 20 centimeters water pressure. Okay? Hold on to your hat. It gets better. So we know now pressure control, the variable is volume, right? Pressure control, the variable is volume. Very important. Pressure control, your variable is volume. And what changes that volume?
Compliance.
And?
Resistance.
Compliance and resistance, right? Okay, so let's talk about volume control now. So volume control, I'm just setting a volume, right? I'm saying like, I want a tidal volume of 500. I dial that in. It says 500 going into that ventilator. If before pressure, when I set pressure, the volume was variable. What if I set volume? What do you think is variable in volume?
Pressure.
The pressure, right? What do you think is going to change the pressure?
Elasticity.
Which could also be called?
Resistance.
Resistance and compliance is what's going to cause the variable of the volume to change, the pressure to change, right? So what happens when we set a volume, this is a kind of interesting thought process in the hospital. Some hospitals don't like to use pressure control because when we set in volume control, I'm setting a volume, the patient always gets that volume, right? You set 500, they get 500 every time that ventilator cycles on the ventilator breath. The variable is the pressure. Nurses always look for peak airway pressure. What's his peak airway pressure? Peak airway pressure could be indicative of lung injury. And we'll go more in depth into that, where that might change your thought process down the road. But they will look at peak airway pressure as lung injury, right? Whereas if you're in pressure control, what would you be needing to monitor on a regular basis? Because pressure control, the pressure is going to stay the same. So you're not looking at your peak pressure. What are we looking at?
Volume.
your volume, right? And most people don't sit there and look at the volumes that are being delivered, because if we calculated 6 mLs per kilo, one, we'd have to know the patient's ideal body weight, right? So if we know their ideal body weight, that makes it a little easier. And we say, oh, their ideal body weight should be 6 to 8 mLs per kilo. That is the two numbers that you should never forget as an RT. 6 to 8 mLs per kilo is what we're looking for. It's our goal for volumes. And we can dance around those volumes and give whatever we need within that range and be pretty good safety wise. But people don't always look at the volumes. So the nurse is not going to see a change. So if there's a change in compliance, there'd be a decrease in volume. And that decrease in volume will allow for CO2 to go up and pH to go down. The patient becomes more acidotic because they're not getting the volume that they need.
So is this the AVAPS versus SIMV kind of argument?
Well, SIMV will give you the same volume as well.
Okay.
Right. So there would be pressure control versus volume control, or SIMV pressure control versus SIMV volume control. It's just the two, pressure versus volume. Which one do you want to do? Right. There are great, we'll talk about caveats, why pressure control is a great mode. And we'll talk about why volume control is a great mode. We'll talk about even times when SIMV is a good mode. CPAP, or pressure support's a great mode. PRVC, all these things, why they're a good mode. One of the things I want to caution you guys on is don't hop on a train and stay on that train. Like if somebody says the only thing that's good is SIMV, well, they're a fool. If somebody says the only thing that you should ever be using is volume control, well, now you're a fool. You put yourself in a box that does not allow you to look at your patient and see what their needs are. If you're sitting there assessing my breathing and Chanel's breathing and Robert's breathing and Sadiq's breathing, that we're all going to breathe differently. We're all going to have different needs and wants when we're breathing. So if you try to put us all in the same mode, well, you know what? You're going to suck at your job, because we don't all breathe the same. If there's no variability in flow, most of, like you might get one person where they're comfy, but you're not going to get all of us, right? So you have to be very open-minded when you're doing your ventilation strategy. There's actually, this is a good lesson as well. There's a traveler at a hospital that said absolutely not. SIMV is the only mode that you should be using. And they were arguing with the educator who said, well, we use volume control and there's research that supports that. And we use pressure control as well. So all of ours are assist control type mode because it decreases the hospital length of stay, or it decreases ventilator days if you go from an assist control mode to pressure support to wean and then extubate. And there's plenty of research that shows that, but they insisted that SIMV was the only way to go, and then started yelling and screaming at the educator and told them to F off. And then he said, have a nice day. You're no longer a traveler here. So that should never, ever, ever happen, where you're getting so emotional about a mode of ventilation, a ventilation strategy, that you start screaming and swearing at people.
Did that happen on Tuesday?
Were you there?
I came right after.
Jerome is not the guy to cross.
Neither's Troy.
Yeah, Troy is not either. Yeah. But yeah, and Jerome has written respiratory care textbooks. He's a very intelligent person and very researched, well-versed in research. He's not the guy you're going to cross. And you're probably not going to outsmart him either. So, so volume control, my variable is pressure. And what is going to cause that pressure to be variable?
Compliance and resistance.
Right. Okay. Pressure control, my variable is going to be
volume.
And what's going to cause that to change?
Resistance and compliance.
Right. Good. Does everybody feel like they got that thought process down? Okay, we're gonna beat the hell out of that thought process to make sure that you do understand that, because this is the very beginning starts of this thought process, and we'll add more information on it. So you make sure you understand that. If you don't understand it, send me a message, send me an email, read through the textbook, and because this is that's the very basis of stuff that we need to grow on. So you need to understand it. All right. So we'll look at the flow. Here's this flow. Flow is how fast the air gets in, right? Flow is this is rarely used, but this is the delivery system where like you're setting a flow. That's it, right? You know, it's a flow mode. This is confusing because we use flow within every ventilator that we use. This is different. This is when we're saying I'm giving volume mode, I'm giving a pressure mode, flow mode, or time mode. We're going to drop, once we get through this section, we know that flow mode and the time mode, we're not using in technology anymore. We're not using those processes anymore. As we look at how we deliver a volume or a pressure, we are using flow, but it's not the mode, not the title of the mode that we're doing it. There's volume or pressure are the two that volume, pressure, or dual mode are the ones that we're seeing in mechanical ventilation now, okay? This is tricky. This is where we get the thought processes confused, is where we start taking this little bit of information here and going, well, it's a flow. Well, there's no such thing as flow anymore. That's not true. Flow will get you tidal volume. But this is a specific way of delivering every single breath, and they called it like a flow mode. And then there's a time cycle mode. We're not doing that anymore, okay? Here's the, we started doing flows. When we deliver flow to a patient to generate a breath, we typically do it at 60 liters a minute. Do you know why 60 liters a minute?
Because an hour?
Yeah, it's is it patient related or is it us related? Because we used to have to calculate absolutely everything by hand, right? So you would do a 1 second I time and a 60 liters of flow per minute. So 60 liters of flow per minute equals 1 liter per second. And if you have 1 liter per second and a 1 second I time, you're getting a tidal volume of 600, right? So it makes the math really easy, right? So, now we have microprocessors that calculate absolutely everything, but we kind of stuck with 60 liters of flow because most patients tend to do well on it. But as you get different disease processes, that flow needs to change. And we'll talk about what flow does in the system. If you increase flow, that will actually decrease your I time, which will lengthen your E time, but we're going to talk all about that down the road. So flow is just how fast you're pushing that air into the system. And time controlled is the other one that we rarely use. So we would just set it just based on time, and you had a constant flow, and then that time would give you a volume over that time. So flow triggering. So in order, anybody who's been in the ICU for their, even on their floor rotation, walk through the ICU or got to hang out in there, we realize that the patient either triggers the ventilator or the ventilator triggers the ventilator, right? It's one or the other. Then we have to realize how it's actually being triggered, right? And there's different ways of triggering a ventilator. Like if the patient generates a negative flow, that pulls flow off the system. There's a bias flow running through the ventilator. So there's constant flow running through that circuit at all times. If their diaphragm drops back, if somebody, what time is it? I'm not doing that. If you're showing up 40 minutes late, I'm not letting you into class. That's ridiculous. I don't know how to get rid of this so I don't have to see it. Yeah, that's just disrespectful. What the hell was I talking about?
The diaphragm goes down.
Diaphragm goes down. We create a negative pressure, a negative flow when the diaphragm goes down, right? The negative pressure on the vent will suck back pressure off the system, or it'll generate a negative flow. So if, with a flow triggering, we have flow running through that circuit. And if the patient creates a negative pressure, they'll be able to pull and generate a breath, right? So, oh, no, it's not. That wasn't Dwayne. I saw Dwayne in here before. So flow triggering is a very sensitive way of a patient triggering a breath. It doesn't take a lot of effort from the patient, and we can adjust the setting on that. We do it based off of liters per minute, how much that patient triggers. And it's a confusing thought process because there's 2 liters running through that system. But if they were to generate a negative flow of 1 liter, it's if you think of a flow meter going at 1 liter, and if you went and suck that air out, would you be able to disturb the flow? If so, that would trigger the ventilator. If you ran that flow meter at 2 liters and put your mouth up to it and went, and you were able to disturb it, you'd be able to trigger that ventilator. If you start getting a flow that's like 10 liters, now the patient would have to go and generate a super large breath to be able to trigger, like they'd have to create a very negative flow to trigger that breath, right? So the higher the number, the higher the liter flow, the harder it is to breathe. The lower the number is, the easier it is to breathe. So babies will put them at like 0.02, right? So that is much easier for them to trigger. If you did a 2 liter on a baby, it would be horrible. They would never trigger the ventilator. And we look at pressure triggering. Pressure triggering is if there's centimeters of water pressure baseline in there, I have a PEEP set at 5, and then the trigger set at -2. That means I have to drop down to 3. All right, so that patient has to suck back 2 centimeters of water pressure out of the system, and then the ventilator will cycle. It's a little harder to do. So the patient has to work a little bit harder before they get a breath. Do we want them to have a hard time doing that? Absolutely not, right? Because they become desynchronous with the ventilator. Flow triggering, it tends to be one of the biggest problems that we have in the ICU. The patient's not doing well. They're not triggering the vent well. They get anxious. Then we walk in the room and inexperienced RT goes, Jesus, patient's flipping out. Or the nurse is in there by herself and she goes, this patient's flipping out. So what do? This happened to me yesterday.
You try to titrate it down, the liter flow?
So that's what we should do.
But they turn it up.
No, what they do is they sedate the patient. He's bucking the vent. That's what you hear the nurse say. He's bucking the vent. So I sedated him. Well, then you coming on shift in the morning, and I'm like, why the hell is that at 8 liters? Standard over at university is like 5 liters. I don't know. If it's a small patient and they have small flow, the smaller patient, then the number should be smaller. So I'll like drop them down to 4. The patient's relaxed. They can trigger the ventilator. They don't feel anxious, right? Have you ever put a gas mask on, or like for me, it's like or your half-face respirator. First time you wore that half-face respirator, not Dom because his wasn't on all the way, but like someone who actually had a tight seal on there. You have to trigger that. You have to break that negative pressure. Has to break that tends to be 3 centimeters of water pressure valve. If the valve gets wet, it sticks harder. So now you have a stronger negative force to be able to break that valve open, and so you can use the filter. That's a lot, right? And I could say, like when I was a firefighter, we had our SCBA, and they had that 3 centimeter trigger on that one to get it to fire. Well, I mean, it's an increased work of breathing, plus that which builds up anxiety, and that anxiety increases your respiratory rate, increases your heart rate, and makes you feel irritable and agitated. So you know what? If I was a patient in the hospital, they would have my first time wearing that. they would have given me sedation and I would have been in there for much, much longer. The more we sedate, the more we paralyze, the longer the patient stays intubated. The longer the patient stays intubated, the more likely are they get a nosocomial infection and die in the hospital. It's our responsibility to set that ventilator in a way that patient can go home sooner. Every single time, every patient that you're going in there, you're assessing how they're reacting on that ventilator. We're going to be looking at their flow volume loops. We're going to be looking at their flow patterns. We're going to be looking at their pressure patterns and their volumes. How are they breathing with that? Are we making them more anxious, or are they just an anxious person? Right? We have to figure that stuff out, or we're going to get ourselves in trouble. Okay. There's another type of flow pattern. There was a volume triggered that we used to use, and nobody uses it anymore. But there's a new one that's been out. I shouldn't say new. It's been out probably like 8-10 years. And it's called NAVA. Does anybody know what NAVA is? Ooh. It is an electrical signal that's coming from your phrenic nerve. So we drop a NG tube down and we sit that sensor right at your phrenic nerve, right at your diaphragm. And that senses a millivolt change. And if the millivolt change will trigger the ventilator. So when the patient has a signal from their brain that goes to the phrenic nerve, the ventilator cycles instantaneously, way faster than any other mode of triggering that's out there. That's pretty neat, isn't it? So Servo owns that technology, and eventually they'll end up selling it to other ventilator companies and they'll be able to use it there. But right now it's proprietary. So they own all that. So that they do that so they can sell their ventilator with that big piece of technology. They're eventually going to have to sell it. When you think of things like pressure regulated volume control, that was in Servo, and then Servo ended up selling that technology to a bunch of other ventilator companies. And if it's called PRVC in another ventilator, then it was sold from Servo. We have a lot of different things. The reason why ventilation is confusing for a lot of people, one of the major reasons is there's so many names for the same damn thing. Right? They will like, so it's auto flow and dragger, PRVC and Servo. No worries. Does anybody need to take a break? I don't even know what time it is. I guess somebody's taking a break. So, it's 8:49. But yeah, so there's all these different names for this technology that's very similar. So once we figure out what those things are and how they work, then it'll make a lot more sense. The beauty of all this, though, it sucks because you got to know it when you're new, right? But then when you're working at your hospital, if you're working at one hospital, they tend to have 1 or 2 ventilators that they use there, and then that terminology stays the same while you're there. But if you're doing PRN or working, people will pick up PRN shifts based on what ventilator that hospital has. It's kind of funny, right? Like I choose to work at, say Swedish because they use the G5 as well. They also have the 980 there, but I'd feel comfortable with the G5. So then I'd feel comfortable there. It's interesting, isn't it? All right. So limit variables, different category. Before we are talking, this is how the breath is delivered. It's a pressure mode. It's a volume mode. We're not worrying about those other ones anymore. We learned that they exist. We don't care anymore, right? Not even on a test. So pressure mode, volume mode. So then how do we limit what we're giving? Say I could give a volume. How does that limit? I can give a pressure. How does that limit? So we have pressure limiting. So say I'm giving 500 mLs and the patient's compliance is poor. I had set my pressure limit at 30 centimeters of water pressure so that peak pressure can't exceed 30. I'm trying to protect the patient's lungs. So therefore, if I'm setting at a volume at 500, I'm saying to the patient, but not out loud, but like I'm saying, if your compliance and resistance changes, I'll give you that volume as long as it doesn't change so much that the peak pressure goes over 30. I won't let you have more than 30. So then we have to watch if we start to limit our, if the alarm goes off, it's stopping and that volume's not going in, right? The same thing when we set pressure control that we were saying before. I set pressure control and sometimes the volumes, once the volumes drop, the volumes are dropping because the resistance went up or the compliance went down. That's the same thing that's happening in that one. But the pressure limiting is saying whatever pressure I'm setting on my alarm is that's where it stops. Can't go any higher. Okay. Not any more complex than that. Volume limiting, I just set a volume and I don't want that patient's volume to go greater than that. So pressure limiting we can think of as like we're decreasing the likelihood of barotrauma, because baro means what?
Pressure.
Barometric pressure, right? Baro means pressure, so we're decreasing barotrauma with a pressure limiting. What are we protecting from when we limit the volume?
Like over lung expansion.
But is there a term that we would use that for that? Barotrauma for pressure.
Value trauma.
Value trauma. See, now when you guys hear that, you're like, oh crap, was that easy? Yeah, value trauma, barotrauma. Is there another kind of trauma in the lungs? You may have read about it. What would that be? Dom shook it. You said yes. Now you got to answer it, dude.
There's like 3 other ones, but I don't know the names. That's what Jerome told me, at least.
Yeah. So the other major one that you'll see on your final is atelectatic trauma. Atelectatic trauma. That means the patient has atelectasis. And we're trying to force a pressure in there or volume in there, and it's sticking. Wham! Pops open, micro tears, ARDS, death. Right? So we want to avoid atelectatic trauma that causes a rapid lung opening with micro tears in the alveoli. Okay. So volume limiting and then flow limiting. Flow limiting is just limiting whatever flow that you put a max on how much flow is going to go into the system. Here's an interesting thought. We're going to talk about this in a little bit. How do I generate a volume? What 2 things generate a volume? This is it's funny. I was sitting in the break room and this girl asked yesterday, how do you create a tidal volume? And I just started laughing because no one in the room could answer it. Well,
Pressure and flow.
You got one of them, right? Flow. I'll give you flow. If you had a constant flow,
Change in pressure.
it will change the pressure, but flow times time equals tidal volume. So if I had my flow going in, the amount of time that it's going in will eventually generate a tidal volume, right? So, like if you had that, like I said, 60 liters going in, and I had that 60 liters going in for 1 second, it should be a tidal volume of 600. Pretty cool, huh? I was like, you guys are asking easy questions. And then they stopped asking me questions. Oh, it was cool though. Remember that CPR in the morning? The one of the RTs, she's new, and but she's been RT for a while. I can't remember her name, but she was doing compressions, and the patient sloughed their gut. So like when a patient's real sick, they slough everything off their gut, like the inner lining of their gut, and they poop it all out, and it smells horrific. Well, she was up on the bed that she asked for a stool, and then they handed a stool like you could sit on, not a stool you could stand on for compressions. And then she was kneeling on the bed doing compressions, and the patient pooped everywhere. So it was all over her pant leg. And I was like, that's really funny. You asked for a stool and they give you a sitting stool, and then the patient gave you poop. You got two kinds of stool and not the one that you wanted. That's impressive. I thought it was hilarious. She did not think it was funny at all, but because she had poop all over her leg. And then she had to go change. We were there. I mean, it was like 6:40 and she already had crap all over her pants. I was like, this isn't going to be a good day for you. but I just want you to know, I didn't have any poop on me at all. So maximum safety pressure. So we limited the pressures on, so remember we were pressure limited before we set that pressure. It's not going to go any higher. Well, pressure limiting is going to sound a little confusing because there's two different types of pressure limiting. Don't make it more confusing than it is. We limit that pressure by saying, I don't want it to go over 30 or 40 or whatever. So it doesn't go over that when the breath is being delivered. If that failed, there has to be a backup system. The FDA requires backup systems in the ventilators, safety systems, right? So the safety systems that are typically built into and required by the FDA are 120 centimeters of water pressure is the max that ventilator will hold within the circuit before it dumps. So yes, there's the one for us for that specific patient that we can adjust. This is a factory, like a manufacturer one that sets the dump off at 120. And you could see this is a 840 ventilator. It's a Puritan Bennett 840. So the patient's peak pressure is 22. I'm sorry, that's their low pressure. This is their max pressure right now. Is what they're getting. It's set at 47. Is what their max is. Okay. So so it's not going to be able to go over 47 just to protect their lungs. One of the things that's important to note when we think about peak airway pressures, people will say, well, a patient should never be over 30 centimeters of water pressure. Okay. Yeah, ideally, but if you have a patient with a highly restrictive disease process, their lungs are so tough. They're so rigid. I shouldn't say lungs, but their thoracic cavity is so rigid that the only way to get a volume in there is a higher peak airway pressure. And what we're actually looking at on those patients is not the peak airway pressure so much as the plateau pressure. Plateau pressure is we put a breath in and then cap the ventilator and look at that pressure and what that generates. And once it's capped in the system, capped, we just stop that breath and then analyze it. You have the pressures within the lungs that equilibrate throughout the whole lungs and up through the ET tube. Once that pressure equilibrates, that is the plateau pressure. Because if you can tell the pressure once there's no movement and flow, and you're able to tell at the flow sensor what the pressure is, all those pressures we equilibrate. So you're actually looking at alveolar pressure, right? You're seeing what's actually hitting the alveoli on a plateau pressure. People always worry about peak airway pressure. Peak airway pressure is indicative of it has resistance included, right? So if it's hard to get that air down the trachea or past that ET tube or the kink in the ET tube or past the suction catheter, then that's what it's showing you, right? It's showing you the lung pressure along with the resistance. So plateau pressure is just the lung pressures. Peak pressure is lung pressures plus resistance. Okay, that's very important to know. It's weird. You'll sit there with a student from another school, and they don't understand that concept, and they're like, the peak airway pressure is going to kill the patient. Peak airway pressure does not tear lungs. High peak airway pressure does not injure lungs. Plateau pressure does. Okay. Do you remember what plateau pressures are dangerous?
They get above 30.
Right. So in the newer stuff says 28 to 30. Anything exceeding 28 to 30 is dangerous. And we know that from retrospective studies in the ARDSNet research that came out in like 2001. This isn't new stuff. This is stuff we've known for a really long time. But there's still places that practice that way, and they don't look at plateau pressures, which is insanity. Like, this works. This means something. It was a like multinational, it's worldwide study, and what the answer is, but people are just too lazy. Was Sarah De Leon in here before? Okay. All right. So time cycled ventilation. If the inspiratory phase ends when did you guys want to take a break? It's 9 o'clock. Or hang on. Yeah, we should probably take a break, huh? Shad, you're slacking, man.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I just did your job for you.
I know. I just was like, let's keep powering through. But if everybody else wants a break, let's take a break.
Yeah.
So.
You just want to like a 10-minute?
Yeah, let's do
Okay.
a 10-minute break.
Sounds good. I'll refresh my coffee. Oh, that's it too.
Is that your dog, Justin? Is that your dog, Justin?
You call me?
Oh no, I was just saying, is that your dog?
Oh yeah.
Cute baby.
It's hard to hear you, man.
I'm sorry. Is that better?
Oh, that's better. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just hold my speaker right there.
Nice. Yeah, she comes to visit every once in a while. But I usually like the kids are, well, Saul's in New York with Liz. And then Soph's at her friend's house. But she had a tournament this weekend. I was working, so
Is this the softball tournament that you had to sit out for 6 hours?
well, I was working, so that was another. Those are always like that.
Okay.
It's usually 2 days, and it's like 5 or 6 hours the first day, and then like the second day, it's like, I don't know, depending on how many games they play.
That's how my volleyball tournaments were. They were like 8 a.m. to like 5 p.m. days.
Yeah, it's like I either freeze my butt off or I get burnt, one of the two. So, but it's fun though. They're I like watching them, but this weekend she was supposed to be in New York, and then I don't know what happened, but so I scheduled myself to work because they're gonna be gone, and then Liz is like, "Oh, I'm leaving her." I was like, Jesus. So I would have not worked, but I got a double task. What? So extra $20 an hour for 24 hours. So I'll take it.
Solid. Take it and run. Take it and run.
You want to keep paying me all that money? I'll take it.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna wait until everybody else logs back on, because I had this conversation with you guys on the other day, but I just want to make sure that we're reiterating it and making sure everybody knows. So what time did I send you guys? I don't even know.
I think 9:05.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was gonna get coffee and stuff, but then I got a phone call. So then I didn't move. I'm doing the final interview with that instructor today at noon. So hopefully that'll go really well, and hopefully I'll take the job, and he is awesome. Actually, Brooke, when I was visiting you, actually it was the guy that I was talking to in the hallway when I ran into you guys. You were like, I don't know, it was after I was talking to Joanna and I saw you there. And then I went downstairs and I was talking, there's a black guy down there that I was talking to. That's the guy. That's
yeah, and I said bye to you and I was like running down the stairs or whatever.
Yeah. So that's the guy. He is so kind, like just such a good person.
Nice.
And I was trying to hold back my excitement when I was interviewing the first time, because but I told so he called to ask about the job, and it was like 7 o'clock at night. He called me to ask about it, and 2 hours later, I was like, dude, I got to put my kids to bed, man. Like, we just chatted about the job and like different passions and passion projects with teaching and, like what you can do with the job and what you can't. But he's just such a smart, good person. So I think he'd be perfect for our team. Just because we have this weird kind of like culture on our team that's just like really kind, caring people. And I don't want to jump and hire somebody that's not, because we've done that. And
So does that mean Stacy won't be teaching us at all anymore?
Oh, she will be.
Is she going to basically be doing what Nicole is doing, right?
Yeah, but
Okay.
she'll still teach some classes. I'm not sure. We're going to revamp everything. So the way I like to do that is say, hey, what are you guys passionate about? I want you to teach the classes that you're passionate about. I won't teach math. Other than that, like if there's a class that, I'll teach whatever's left over because I want the instructors to have like passion. Like it's funny because not many people want to teach mechanical ventilation. And it has nothing to do with the content. The content's fun, right? The content's great. And it's like the bread and butter of all RTs. The problem is it is nonstop 6 weeks. Like even though like I've already have all this stuff built, you're still putting in like for my lecture for tomorrow, I'll put in 2 or 3 hours worth of work for that lecture tomorrow to make sure all my stuff is fresh in my head. And it's comfortable, right? It's rough being 6 weeks of Monday through Friday doing that, right? People didn't want to do it, so then I took the class on, and I love the class. I think it's great. It's very difficult to do while doing the program director role as well. So, and then pretty soon I'll be kicking in and teaching pediatrics as well in the afternoon. So that'll be, I think it's like, I don't know, that's like Tuesday, Thursday or something. I don't even know. So that's, you figure that's 8 hours scheduled for teaching for one day. And that's a lot. So, and then you still have interviews. You still have the admissions is like, oh, I need you to do an interview in the morning. Like, I can't, I'm teaching in the morning. Like, well, this person can only do them in the morning. I'm like, is there any other time? They're like, if not, it's 8 o'clock at night. So then I'm like doing interviews at 8 o'clock at night during the week. I'm like, ugh, that's the last thing I want to do at 8 o'clock at night is interview. But it's either that or charting, right? So, all right. Now, are there other people that like Sarah, Sadiq, and Jason? Are you here, or I can't like? There we go. All right.
Yes, I am. Sorry.
Anyways, so before we talk about that other stuff, I want to remind you, like with a couple things. We talked about it at the end of the lecture. So people, if you were here last time, sorry. We keep getting more and more messages from hospitals saying that they're going to be requiring the COVID shot just the same as they do with the flu vaccine. So just know if you are, like if you're not, like I'm not getting it, then it really, really limits our places that we can send you now. And Stacey's already feeling the heat on it because like here we are, we have our schedule set up. And now they send us a message and say, okay, but all of it, like if they don't have a vaccination, they can't come here. Then now we kind of get ourselves pinched, right? Because now we got to find another spot for that person and everybody else already has their schedule. And if they already have their schedule now, like who do you change it with? There's no other spots available because every other school is out there as well. We're going to get ourselves in a bind where we can't place somebody because of that. And it happens with, people are like, they get in the program and they're like, I'm not getting a flu shot. Well, I can't place you anywhere without a flu shot. And they're doing the same exact thing with the vaccination for COVID. That and like with our schedules, I understand everybody's got busy schedules. when you limit days or limit a lot of days, some people will say these are the 3 days I could do clinical rotation. We're at the point now where I told Stacy, if that's the case, you either say these are the days you can go, or we can't. We don't have any more hospitals. We don't have any more spots. There's a lot of hospitals that are still like, we're not allowing students because of COVID. Well, I mean, come on, man, it's a little far along, but we don't make that decision. So if your schedule is tight and we can't, there's no flexibility with it, well, guess what? I literally can't send you anyplace. We can't, if the only spots are where another student is already at, I can't move another student. That's not fair to them. They've already built their life around the schedule that they received. I can't keep moving them. One, it's a nightmare and you got to resubmit all the paperwork, but you can't keep moving them. It's not fair. So I know we have busy schedules, but you need to have your schedule. So this is part of the process. It's in the orientation when you first start. It's in the orientation, with clinical rotation, first clinical rotation. It's every one of them. You have to have flexibility with your slots, your days, because we can only give you what they give us. We can't make stuff up. We can't, we can't say, no, you're taking them. It's just not how it works, So if you only have 3 days a week that you're able to work or do your clinical rotations, I'll be honest with you, you might have to get bumped until next semester, right? So it's not that we don't like you. It has nothing to do other than the fact that we just don't have those spots. So I told Stacy, like, she's revamped so many times, and it's like, when you make one person's change, you end up affecting 3 other people's schedule. So that's literally a whole day she lost by making one person's change. I said, okay, you have to keep your sanity. I need to keep you as a clinical director. I need you to stay sane. You shouldn't be working 14 hours a day to fix a schedule. So just know that I told her, no, you're not doing that. You can't do that. It's not healthy. So the other thing, and I'm going to send out an email. If you're like more than 5 minutes late and you haven't sent me an email, I'm not letting you in a damn class. That's I don't show up late. Don't show up late. It's disrespectful. It's the same thing when you come into class, when you come into clinical rotation. If you're more than a few minutes late and you hadn't called, you're going home. I tell them, just send them home. They can figure out how to make up their hours. We have to be accountable for ourselves. I understand there's a lot of things going on in people's lives. I get it. I'm like trying to figure out how the heck I'm going to get my kid to school. And sometimes to be honest with you, on Thursdays, half of the Thursdays I say, dude, you're doing online school today. I'm lecturing and it's going to go past 10 o'clock. You either can go in late or you got to stay home and just do a school online. Because, this is my job. So that's what puts food on the table. So, all right. Is there any questions on any of that stuff? I know there's a lot of variables associated with that stuff, but we just don't have the flexibility that allows us to do some, stuff. I don't know. All right. Time cycle ventilation. Inspiratory phase when it ends. So if I set an I time and it's at 1 second, that breath goes in for 1 second. Once I hit that 1 second, ventilator stops delivering flow. It rotates into exhalation. The patient begins to exhale. Time cycled ventilation. What's cool about these things, it's not like tricky, right? They'll say, like pressure limited, time cycled. So stop for a second and go, pressure limited. What does that mean? It can only go to a certain pressure. Time cycled. It cycles for a certain amount of time, right? So the interval is controlled by a timing mechanism in the ventilator. And remember that tidal volume equals flow divided by time times inspiratory time. Okay. So if you just look at flow over, flow over a certain period of time, we'll give you a tidal volume. Okay. The servo I and the Draeger, well, there's a ton of ventilators. You have an I time, it's going to cycle that way. Flow cycled ventilation. This is going to be more like your 980 and 840 Puritan Bennett, where you set a flow instead of an I time. So this other one here, we're setting an I time. On here, we're setting a flow cycled. So like how much of that flow is going in, right? The faster the flow, the shorter the inspiratory phase. The higher the flow, the longer the inspiratory phase. Okay? The ventilator cycles into the expiratory phase once the flow has decreased to a predetermined value. And we'll set that in like our back mode. It's like 25% is what it's going to decrease to before it rolls into exhalation. Flow cycling is the most common cycling mechanism in the pressure support mode. If you're like pressure support mode is just giving assistance to a breath, right? Allowing the patient to have a larger volume. Pressure support was designed to help the patient by overcoming the resistance of the ET tube, giving more force in the breath to overcome the resistance of the ET tube. That was the original design for it. But it is delivered based off of flow. The patient pulls flow off of the system, or flow is given to the patient from the system to generate a larger volume. So Puritan Bennett 840s, 90s, and it was a 7200 before that, is what it is one of the ventilators that one of the styles of ventilators that focuses on flow cycle ventilation. Pressure cycle ventilation. Inspiration ends when a set pressure threshold is reached at the mouth or the upper airway or flow/pressure sensor. The exhalation valve then opens and the exhalation begins. That's where I start saying, like, I'm setting the ventilator at 20 centimeters of water pressure, 25 centimeters of water pressure. Once it hits 25, it opens up, no more volume is being generated or pressure is being generated, and the patient goes into exhalation. Okay. The expiratory phase, I thought that was a really clever picture. The expiratory phase encompasses the period from the end of inspiration to the beginning of the next breath. So the patient stops that inspiration. Now, if it's not inspiration, it's expiration, right? But there's a pause as well, like inspiratory plateau. But that exhalation begins. What is on a mechanical ventilator? A mechanical ventilator is exhalation passive or active? This is actually a question on the boards.
Passive.
Passive, very passive, right? Nice and easy. You know, you will
Wait,
actually.
Can you ask the question again, Justin?
No. So if just kidding. Is exhalation, when you have a patient on a mechanical ventilator, is exhalation passive or active? It's passive, right? All that's doing is the muscles and the elasticity of the thoracic cavity is just going back to its natural state, right? That's all it wants to do is go back to its natural state. So we force the air in, it goes back to its natural state by itself. Where do we end up having a problem with that?
Obstructive disorders?
Yes, Jason, rocking it out. Our obstructive patients, what do they not have that you and I have? Yeah, they don't have that same elasticity that wants to close back up, right? So what is that going to do if we put 500 mLs into our breath? Both of us did, an obstructive patient, a normal patient. What's going to be the variable with that to get back down to zero?
The elasticity to push it out.
Yeah, they don't have good elasticity, right? So it's going to take longer, right? It'll take much longer to get back to a zero if that's what you're trying to do, right? So we'll put the 500 in. Like say if I intubated Chad and put 500 mLs in his lungs, it's going to go in. Say I put it in for 1 second. It'll take about 2 to 3 seconds to come out and be totally out. An obstructive patient might take 5 or 6 seconds to come completely out. They don't have the elasticity that Shad has because he's young and he doesn't smoke, right? So that, well, I'm glad you held it this way, not this way. Expiratory phase, yeah. If an inspiratory hold is used, expiration is delayed because inspiratory hold, we give it inspiration, it gets that full inspiration, and then it holds. What are we looking at when we do an inspiratory hold?
Plat pressure.
Plateau pressure. Brooke for the win. There's another thing that we do as an inspiratory pause. Ooh. What will we use that for?
PIP, peak inspiratory pressure.
Nope, that's going to be generated just by us doing all the other stuff. I'll give you a hint. Is it to better oxygenate or better ventilate?
Ventilate.
Close. We stay in the inspiratory phase longer. Staying in the inspiratory phase longer will increase the mean airway pressure. Mean airway pressure is indicative of oxygenation. The higher the mean airway pressure to a point. This is one. Okay, I'm going to give you this other one. Mean airway pressure improves oxygenation. We increase mean airway pressure to improve oxygenation. You should write that down. And then you have to write at the end, to a point. Because if we increase our mean airway pressure too high, we impede venous return and the patient dies.
So increasing your mean pressure is to increase your ventilation, is what you said?
Nope, oxygenation.
Oxygenation.
Mm-hmm. So on the other side, so this is one of those I want you to put like on a poster board in your room, you know, like pressure control, the variable is volume. Volume control, the variable is pressure. Mean airway pressure improves oxygenation to a point. What improves ventilation? An increase in?
The rate.
Rate times?
Volume.
Equals?
Something.
Minute ventilation.
There we go.
Yeah. So minute ventilation improves ventilation, right? Because you're giving a larger volume over time, set time, a minute, right? Larger volume over time improves ventilation to a point, and then mean airway pressure improves oxygenation to a point. Okay. Those 4 things are like the main questions I will ask you on. I will ask you literally a question on every MRE, every test, every scenario that we do, because those are the main thought processes that you need to understand. All right. Everything else, it can be broken down from one of those. Okay.
Justin, you said minute ventilation improves ventilation to a point. What happens if we just keep ventilating? Will we blow off too much CO2?
Well, you could, yeah. But how many mLs per kilo are we supposed to use?
6 to 8 or 5
6
to
to 8. What if I do 12?
You're going to be blowing off more, right?
We'll be blowing off more CO2, but we'll also be shredding alveoli.
Okay.
Our plateau pressure will be too high, which will be indicative of volume trauma because we're giving volume, barotrauma if we're giving pressure. So that will cause lung injury down the road, which will kill the patient, right? So those 2 points kill the patient, like increasing mean airway pressure. What's the fastest way to increase mean airway pressure? This is another one of those things you write down on that little list. Fastest way to increase mean airway pressure.
Add a PEEP?
Yes, very good. Because, so mean airway pressure is a compilation of all the pressures that occur, the average of all the pressures in the lungs. So if I increased I time, that would increase mean airway pressure. If I increase the volume, that would actually, because the PIP would then be higher, the peak inspiratory pressure would be higher, I would increase the mean airway pressure. If I increase the rate, they'd be in the inspiratory phase longer, so I'd increase the mean airway pressure. But if I increase the PEEP, so all those things are added up together and they're sitting on the PEEP. Now, if I increase the PEEP, the whole scale goes up, right? And the whole scale goes up quickly. So if I need to open up those alveoli and leave them open, I increase the PEEP, because say if I went from a PEEP of 5 to a PEEP of 10, my mean airway pressure just jumped by 5 because I went from 5 to 10. But if I increase my I time, it might go up by 1. Increasing my PEEP is the fastest way to do it. Okay. Remember, to a point. If I have a patient with a labile blood pressure, I can't go up too high on my PEEP because I'll collapse their blood vessels. There's nothing holding that structure open. Okay. So I have to be careful, or I'll squish their heart and put more excess work on their heart, and they won't be able to compress very well. Well, they'll compress, they just can't refill. So, all right. Okay, so I'm not sure if you guys are going to get that reference, but it's actually a really good reference if you are like into like late 90s, early 2000 rap thing. Bass, how low can you go? Death row, to what a brother know. No. Anyways, yeah, that so baseline pressure. We look at PEEP, right? But what is the PEEP? If they don't have any PEEP, it's 0, right? But we all should have some intrinsic PEEP in our airways, right? But PEEP is positive end expiratory pressure. It's the pressure that's positive that's in our lungs after exhalation, right? The baseline of everything. So when we're adding, depending on what kind of ventilator we're looking at, ventilators add things differently. But if we're looking at the ventilator and our PEEP is 5, everything is on top of that PEEP. So if I set 20 over 5, if 20 centimeters above that. Oh, late 80s, not 90s. Oh, dude, yeah. Well, I mean, I was actually DJing at a skating rink back then. You want to talk about cool? I was like the party panda. I was dressed in the party panda costume and skate around. And I was a DJ there too. It's pretty hard. Actually, when I went back to Rochester last month, I went back to that skating rink, and the girl that runs it is the same girl that I used to work with when I worked there when I was like 14, 15. She's still at that's the only job she's ever had, working at the skating rink. She's so kind and so sweet and still really hot. But that is sad. I mean, for her, she loves it, but I would like lose my mind. All right. So if the PEEP is 0, these are good terms to know down the road, because you'll see these things on those stupid forums that are like, like, no, that's a 0 PEEP. You mean a ZEEP? 0 PEEP. ZEEP. Sounds cool. Or atmospheric pressure. It's called ZEEP, 0 end expiratory pressure. If it has a positive pressure, it's labeled as positive end expiratory pressure. And then negative end expiratory pressure is NEEP. Why would you use a negative end expiratory pressure?
To help with exhalation.
You know, Brooke, that was the theory on that. And it was done in neonates in the 70s. They thought if we generate a negative pressure, it would be easier for the patient to take a breath. But what they didn't realize is they were killing babies like a mofo, Chuck D, by collapsing the alveoli, and the patients already had no surfactant. So now they're allowing for the alveoli to stick to each other. There's no surfactant on them, so the alveoli got stuck. Then we had a high peak airway pressure before they went popped open, and we shredded all their lungs, and they all died. So they all end up having BPD and being vent dependent if they did live. So, So NEEP is no longer used because we found that it causes problems. Having too low of a PEEP damages your surfactant production and effectiveness because the alveoli stick to each other. Always remember that balloon. The first time you go to blow up a balloon, first time you're blowing it up, it's super hard to blow up. That is what it's like when you don't have surfactant. Now, if they put that soapy substance in there and they do a little squirt into the balloon and then blow it up, it opens up really easy. They're decreasing surface tension, right? That's the goal, decrease surface tension. And then it allows for better expansion. Our goal is that we never let the alveoli collapse so that they're not touching each other itself. If they're shunted open, then we're able to oxygenate better. If it's collapsed, the blood vessels are wrapped around it. There's no ventilation occurring or minimal ventilation occurring. If they're shunted open, even when they're not in full inspiration, there's still oxygen going across that, seeping into the blood vessels and oxygenating the patient's tissues. Okay.
Justin, really fast. I'm sorry. What was the goal? Is to decrease surface tension?
Yes.
Oh.
Yep. Yeah. Surface tension is bad. You know, we'll have surface tension in anything, right? However, if we can decrease the surface tension by using surfactant, then the patient will be able to ventilate and oxygenate better. Sound good?
Is this the same concept for adults too, who have normal surfactant?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and now think about it. When we have a patient with ARDS, they not only have stuff on the outside of their alveoli, we also denature the proteins and damage the proteins and then decrease the production of surfactant, right? So we damage the surfactant, decrease the production of surfactant, and then they end up shredding the ever-living crap out of their airway because they have to have such a high PEEP to keep that from collapsing on itself. Okay. Once you start visualizing those alveoli closing and getting stuck, then it starts to make a little bit more sense. This is cool. I'm going to find a cool video. Oh man, I just ruined that. So I just gave you that. And then CPAP and PEEP. CPAP is the application of pressure above ambient pressure throughout the inspiration and expiration. What's the difference between CPAP and PEEP?
I thought they were the same.
They're the same. The only difference is one's a closed system and one's the open system, right? Open system is CPAP. Closed system is like on a ventilator. So that's PEEP, right? There's another word that we can use or acronym that we can use that means the same thing as PEEP or CPAP. It's on a high frequency ventilator. And that's mean airway pressure, which is kind of weird, but it's the mean airway pressure is the same as PEEP, which is the same as CPAP, which is also the same as EPAP.
Can you say that all one more time, but maybe slower?
EPAP, CPAP, PEEP, and mean all mean the same thing. Mean on an oscillator, PEEP on a ventilator, CPAP on a CPAP machine or non-invasive machine, and then also EPAP is the other one on a non-invasive machine. They all mean the exact same thing. It's just how they're delivered. So if we increase the amount of verbiage for the same dang thing, we look smarter and they increase our pay.
But does it really?
I started off and I made what? $14 an hour.
Started off at $14 an hour?
As an RT. Yep.
What year
Jumped
was
up to 17 when I got my RRT. So like 6 months later. Because back then you did it differently. You weren't allowed to tell, you had to work for 6 months and then you could take your CRT and then you could take your RRT. So you worked under somebody else's license. So 6 months later, I took my CRT and then like a week later, I took my RRT. And then they bumped me up to $17 an hour. I left Children's at $46 an hour.
What year did you start being an RT?
99.
Wow.
You don't need to tell me how old you are. That's fine. I don't need it. That's like, oh, I was like,
No, it wasn't like an old thing. It was just more like how much wages have changed.
yeah. I thought you were going to be like, oh, I was in elementary school. Oh, you're so old.
No, that wasn't what I was getting at.
Okay, good. Because I had something happen to me yesterday. And I was like, oh, I am old. And I'm still trying to recover from that. All right. Any questions on PEEP, CPAP, EPAP, and mean? We'll talk about mean on an oscillator much more down the road. And then spontaneous breaths are what is triggered by the patient. Mandatory breaths are what's triggered by the ventilator. Remember, the mandatory breaths, if I set a rate of 12, how many breaths a minute am I going to be delivering? I mean, sorry, yeah. How often will that breath be delivered? That's what I meant to say.
5 breaths a minute?
No, a rate of 12, but it would cycle every
5 seconds.
And
every
5
5 seconds, right? So if I set a rate of 10, every 6 seconds the vent would cycle, right? So so I need to remember, like I set a rate of 20, every 3 seconds the vent would cycle, right? It's just, so what would you call that? We know there's a time associated. We know there's a cycle associated.
I to E ratio?
Time cycled. Time cycled breath, right? So like I'm setting the rate will give me, if I set a rate on a ventilator that's not pressure support, right? It's like an assist control or volume control, volume control, SIMB, whatever. I set that and the ventilator is time cycled. So every 5 seconds it'll go because I set the rate at 12, right? And then every 3 seconds, if I set it at 20, it's going to cycle because 20 goes into 63 times. That means my cycle time is 3 seconds. And we'll talk a lot more about that when we're about I to E ratios with that time cycle. But every 3 seconds, then that vent's going to cycle. It's time cycled, right?
Every time you're going to be dividing it by, or dividing the 60 by whatever that number is then, right, Justin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And you'll get really good at all of those because we work with it on a regular basis, right? I had a nursing student, well, she's a new grad, super, super sweet girl yesterday. She's like, I don't understand like how you know what rate to set the ventilator with that blood gas. It's like, let me show you. I have my students do this all the time. And we'll do the actual over desired calculation. And she goes, did you do that in your head before you got to the ventilator? I was like, no, he's 747. Like, I just need to drop the rate by 1. It's so close to being normal. I'm like, what do you want it to be? Do you want it to be 774? You want it to be 745? What do you want it to be? Like, well, and then I showed her how to calculate it out. And she's like, oh my God, that's amazing. So like, there's typically a calculation for everything that we do. As you get old and you've done it 1,000 times, you're like, that's dropping it by a rate of 2, and you'll be pretty close. So, and then that's the mandatory breath. And then spontaneous, I'm going to save that for next lecture. Never mind. I don't want to do that yet. No confusion. If you're always trying to be normal, you'll never know how amazing you can be. That's why I don't try to be normal.
Justin, back to the CPAP and PEEP. Which one was open and which one was closed?
CPAP, remember a CPAP machine is non-invasive. So there's always a leak, right?
Okay.
And then PEEP is for the ventilator.
So CPAP's open, PEEP is closed.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Justin, I also have a question too, going back a few slides. When you said exhalation is passive on the mechanical ventilator, does that mean inhalation is active?
Absolutely. Yep. Because if they're on the ventilator, well, even us, like you're activating muscle contraction to generate a volume, right? Your diaphragm contracting drops it down. So that's active. A ventilator breath is active because the machine is actually, like compressing air and pushing it along. So remember that. So that's P muscle plus P vent is active. And then the passive side of it is the, elasticity and the resistance, right? Pretty cool, right? It's really neat when an equation actually makes sense. I remember doing equations when I was younger. They didn't really make sense to me. And I was like, I don't know what we're trying to get at, but this one makes a whole lot of sense because, whatever you're putting in is going to come back out, right? So it's the positive side is on the ventilator side or the muscle contraction side. And then the negative side or neutral, going back to neutral, is on the other side. Cool, cool, cool. What other questions you guys got?
I don't want to keep everybody, but I have a few questions from the book, actually, Justin.
All right. So if anybody wants to drop off, feel free to drop off and we'll start answering questions. Well, you got a party going on at your house, Shad?
No, but there's lots of people here at the current moment. So
yeah, I heard somebody just say F and A. That's awesome.
Sorry.
I never swear, so it's really offensive to me. No, I'm just kidding. What's your question?
Okay, so do you have your book by chance?
Book or workbook?
It's the
Is the
book.
workbook or the is the workbook or not?
It's the actual book that I have a
Okay.
question in.
Thank you.
Yeah. So on page 31, Justin, it has the pictures of like the different pressure control ventilation and then the volume control ventilation.
Yep.
So those are just the pictures of what it would look like on the ventilator, correct?
Yeah, it's a generalized view of what.
Okay.
It's a very simplistic view of what that graph would look like.
So I'm just wondering, so on the pressure, so like, let's look at the first one. So for pressure, for inspiration, you would have the like curve, right? You wouldn't have the shaded area though, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And then, so then on all the way over to the right, those are just the equations to get those, or what you should be having set.
Well, that's so P total is P muscle plus P vent. That they equate that to P total. So the pressure total. So what the patient can generate with their muscle contraction and the ventilator, what that can generate.
Okay, got it.
Does that make sense? And then the leftover is the elasticity and resistance. Like how to get it back.
So then for like your next equation, your P elasticity. So that's just talking about how elastic your lungs then are. And that's the equation to see how elastic they are.
Because remember, your volume is determined by the compliance, right? So like how compliant you are. I'm pushing that error in. If I'm more compliant, the volume will be larger. If I'm less compliant, the volume will be lower.
Okay, got it. And then I had another question, actually. I got to find it, though. So will you go to page 37? So there's those two graphs as well. So those are both are they both for pressure cycled ventilation?
Pressure support ventilation.
Pressure support ventilation. Mm-hmm. So then the bottom one, it's saying at 25% is when it would stop being triggered, correct?
Yeah, remember when, not triggered. This class is kind of funny because there's a lot of, I'll stop you with terminology and say, don't use that one, right? Because that conflicts with another thought process. And if you can put those thought processes in the right categories, they'll make more sense as we go along. So that's an expiratory phase, right? That's an expiratory percentage. And it's depending on the type of ventilator, there's an expiratory flow percentage. So as you reach 25% of the maximum flow, that it will roll into exhalation. So
it wouldn't be the trigger, it would be the exhalation.
That's, yeah.
It's just when your exhalation starts then?
No, if you look at it, so when you're talking to that 25% of peak flow, it rolls it into, when flow drops to 25% of peak flow, measured during inspiration, the ventilator flows out of inspiration into expiration. So the patient comes up here, they're taking that big breath. I don't know if you can see that, but they're taking that breath, and then the flow starts to taper off. See how it breaks away from the timeline and it starts to drop. Once it starts to drop off of the expected flow and it hits 25%, it dumps into exhalation. Because if you think about it, what's that? The patients met their maximum and they can't do any more. So there's only so much expansion that can occur after their maximum. So that just goes in exhalation.
So then I guess my question is why is there such a hard line after the 25%? Like it just goes straight down. Is it because the ventilator just like drops it off, or is it to keep it above the 25%? Does that make sense at all?
Oh, I see. Oh, you're looking in a different spot. I see where you're looking. Yeah. Well, so remember, the patient's still able to exhale, right? But that just dumps the rest of the stuff off and begins back into inspiration again. It's got to get back to baseline. So it goes back to there and then starts off again.
So then, stupid question, is baseline 0 or 25% at that point?
Baseline is PEEP.
Okay.
And that's tricky now because you're talking about pressure and volume, right? But I should say flow and pressure are the two that you're looking at, because the flow, as it decreases to 25%, rolls out of dumps the rest and then goes into inspiration. So you're decreasing a pressure, which with the flow dropping, it decreases the pressure.
That makes so much more sense.
Okay,
thank you.
Good.
That's all I have. So,
all right.
And then the only other thing I saw is there's no place to put in the 15 questions from the book. So I don't know if you want to put that on.
Thank you.
I don't know if you'll put that in Monday or Tuesday.
I'll put it in today.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep.
Justin, also about the lab times, how are you splitting the class up? Because I know we all can't go at once.
Yeah, let me,
Whoa.
Sign up genius. So what I'll do is sign up genius for Wednesday. If she says I can't do Wednesday, then we'll bump it to Friday. She's supposed to get, I should be getting a message sometime today.
So it's Wednesday or Friday?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Sign up genius and then set up text assignment. All right. What other question you got?
That was it for me.
That's it. This stuff's kind of fun, right? Is it starting to make like for the people that had exposure to ventilators, is it starting to make a little bit more sense? Good.
I think so.
Good. And we'll the more time, really, like the more time you have, you just like literally need to get in there. And if I just said, turn the ventilator on and start turning dials, put a filter on it, see what it feels like when it's breathing. I want you to see what it feels like with CPAP or pressure support, right? Volume control, pressure control, all those things. You'll start to feel how they feel. And you go, that makes sense. And we'll get much more in depth, like in pressure. What's the difference between the pressure control versus volume control and why? And when you understand the why, then you understand why the implementation, right? So like, I'm like, oh my God, this patient's like a burn patient. When I think of a burn patient, lung injury, right? So if they have lung injury, but then also like, wait a minute, I want to be in an inspiratory phase longer with the peak pressure at max. So that way the patient can oxygenate better, because they probably had, they have lung injury, but they also probably had carbon monoxide poisoning, which causes them to have not good oxygenation. So I can actually improve their oxygenation status by putting them in pressure control and limiting their peak airway pressure at the same time. So why would I not put them in? And then I can adjust the rise time to make them oxygenating better. And then on the other side too, I can put them in volume control and really limit the amount of volume that they're receiving, which keeps them from having volume trauma. So there's a lot of cool things that we can do. And then our dual modes, we can do both at the same time. It's pretty cool. The stuff that we're able to do is awesome now. We were so limited back in the day, like where you had like 2 modes of ventilation, and and they weren't great. And the analysis of what was going on was terrible. We didn't have graphics on our ventilators. I'll show you the picture of the vent that I started working on, and you'll be like, that looks like an airplane. It looks like the inside of an airplane, a cockpit where all the dials. And then, and you calculated everything by hand. And now it just spits out on the computer. It's pretty, that's pretty awesome. And you literally see what's happening inside the patient's lung based off of their graphics. That's cool, right? And now we have the ability to actually literally go into their lungs and look at their lungs with a bronch, clean stuff out. Technology is absolutely amazing. I got called to do a leukine treatment on a patient. I had no idea what it was. So I had one of my former students go with me because I'd never given that medication before. And it's you have to take your 4 vials, and then you take your 4 vials and you put 1 ml into each one, and then you have to roll them. You can't shake them. You got to roll them. And then after they've been mixed, then you take and put another 2 mLs into each one, and then you draw them all up into a syringe, and then you put them in this weird nebulizer that looks like a water bong, and you give the medication to the patient that way. And it's for they have high levels of protein in their lungs at all times. So it denatures it. Instead of when you wash out their lungs, you give them this medication. It keeps them from having to get a washout all the time. It's crazy. And, but you'll always be coming up with this new stuff, seeing new things that you get exposed to. And sometimes that humbleness has to jump into your, and really my student graduated 2 years ago, and she's the one that's showing me how to do this medication I'd never even heard of. So, but here's something I want you to remember too. If someone says, "Hey, I've never done that before," one of the guys in the break room, this is this dude, he goes, "Man, it's real easy. Once you see that stuff, you know exactly what to do." Have you done it before? No. So you give me advice on how to do it, but you've never done it before, and then you're telling me I'll just be fine. I'll figure it out as soon as I look at it. Where's the policy? He's like, "Man, I don't even know if they have a policy." You're not the guy I'm going to for information. And then, Heather walks in and she's like, "Here's the policy. Let's go do it." That's the way it should be. If you know how to do it and you've done it before, just help somebody out. And I'm here I am, an old dude, following my old student around, but I'm sure it felt good for her too, though. She had some knowledge I didn't, that's pretty cool. What other questions you got?
Thanks, Justin.
Wondering if you were going to be posting today's lecture in Blackboard for today.
Oh, it's on Tuesday.
This that you're recording right now is going to be on Tuesday?
Oh, I see what you're saying. But yeah, I'll put it in here. And this one's already recorded on Loom. So if you go to Monday.
I know, Justin, I just listened that lecture last night, and the one from today is a little bit better than that one.
Yeah, because that was on Loom, right? This one?
Yes.
Yeah,
it's perfect though. I could hear works perfect, but this lecture is richer than that one.
It's what?
I get more information. I get more notes from this one than that one. I got from that one too, but if you could post both, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah, and the reason it's so hard with those other ones, it was so hard because you're not talking to anybody. There's no one else in the class. So there's no, how would I know what question you have? I was literally sitting in my basement blah, blah,
because
blah.
this lecture is better because we are interacting with you. And
I'm not really saying that you guys do. It's it's forced interaction. But and then you all have an inability to laugh and smile. I don't know why.
I'm laughing the whole time.
You guys got to really work on your sense of humor because I am hilarious. Nobody laughed at my joke. When that lawyer asked me what if I was on the criminal side, I thought it was I was really proud of that joke, and nobody there laughed except for the girl that I was with. She was like, "Oh, that's really funny," and then I don't think he really understood until later that I meant that I was a criminal earlier. I was joking that I was a criminal earlier, but he didn't really get that. And then he's like, I told him, I said, yeah, I was an aircraft mechanic before I did respiratory. And he's like, I got a flat tire and it took me like 2 hours to get here. And I was like, how long does it take you to change a tire? And he goes, oh, I didn't change it. And I was like, I should have known that when I shook your hand. And he didn't laugh at all. Like,
He didn't laugh because you insulted him.
I'm like, your hands are so soft, sir. Like, do you lotion them hourly? But he was actually really funny, and like he bought me a couple glasses of whiskey. So I was like, I kind of like you. But you could tell they all make way more money than I do. Although,
yeah, because you drive the Impala,
my gangster car. It was funny though, because I was like, yeah, like I guess I drive a gangster car, and I'm like, but what's crazy is like, I never knew, no clue. So, and then like, wait a minute, like what? And I was wearing a shirt. It says "suck less" on it. So she's like, "Do you have a button-up shirt that you could wear?" I was like, "Yeah, I should probably put a button-up shirt." So, I don't know. I'm used to my friends; they're cool. Like, they can like at any moment like go work on a car and not have to change, like because it doesn't matter. But these people are not like that. So, but they do eat good food. They bought some good food there. It's pretty tasty. What kind of RT questions you got?
I think I'm good.
All right. The Sarahs? You all done? All right.
No, I'm okay. Thank you, Justin.
Sounds good. We'll see you. Ileana, any questions for me? Oh, let me, I'm going to stop the recording.
Yeah.